In about 90 seconds, every slide on that phone would rewrite the power structure of this dining room. My father squinted at the screen. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. And my sister went completely still. Because to understand why I was the calmest person at that Thanksgiving table, and why my sister's loopy handwriting with the little hearts dotting the I's was about to unravel her entire perfect life, you need to know about 5 intercepted envelopes, a deleted email, and a set of peppermint sticks. My name is Claire. I was 36. I managed environmental conservation projects for a nonprofit in the Great Lakes region. The kind of work where you spend 3 years writing grant proposals, then one Tuesday afternoon, you get a phone call telling you that $5 million has been approved to restore wetland ecosystems across 4 counties. That was my Tuesday, November, the year before. I drove home that evening with the windows down despite the cold. The air off Lake Michigan smelled like iron and pine. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. Not from nerves, but from the quiet kind of joy that settles somewhere between your collarbone and your throat when something you built actually works. Lucas was in the kitchen when I walked in. He was debugging something on his laptop, 3 monitors glowing, a cold cup of coffee beside him that he'd forgotten 2 hours ago. That was Lucas, a software engineer who could find a buried line of code in 2 million lines of text, but couldn't remember to eat lunch. I told him about the grant. He closed his laptop, stood up, pulled me into a hug that lasted 11 seconds. I counted because that's what I do, and said, "You earned every cent of that." We'd been together 4 years, married 6 months by then. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand my family, you need to understand one thing. There were 2 daughters, and one of them was Jessica. Jessica was 3 years older. She had the kind of confidence that filled a room the way perfume fills an elevator. You noticed it before you noticed her. She laughed loudly, hugged strangers, brought homemade banana bread to every neighborhood event. People loved Jessica. Everyone said so. And then there was me. I was the one who got straight A's and a pat on the head. Jessica got C's and a party. I paid my own way through college, $47,200 in student loans that took me 9 years to clear. Jessica's tuition was covered by our parents, all 4 years. When I asked my mother about it once, just once, she tilted her head and said, "Jessica needed the help more, honey. You've always been so capable." Capable. That word followed me like a shadow. When Dad needed his roof replaced, I sent $8,400. Jessica sent a card. When Mom had her knee surgery, I took 2 weeks off work to drive her to physical therapy. Jessica called once from a spa in Scottsdale to say she was sending healing energy. I drove 4 hours from Chicago for every holiday: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, Mom's birthday, Dad's retirement party, Jessica's engagement dinner, her bridal shower, her bachelorette brunch. I was there every time, smiling, bringing gifts I couldn't quite afford, sleeping on the pull-out couch that smelled like mothballs, while Jessica got the guest room with the good pillows and the working ceiling fan. Not once in 2 years did any of them visit me. Not once had they seen my apartment, met my friends, or sat across a table in the city where I'd built my life. And every Christmas, Mom set Jessica's place at the head of the table. Mine was the folding chair, by the kitchen door. I never said anything. I'd learned early that pointing out the imbalance only made me look petty, so I smiled. I helped with the dishes. I drove home in silence and told myself it didn't matter anymore. I was wrong about that last part. I'm Tom Lavizio. Jessica married Richard when she was 31. Richard was a litigation attorney, the kind who wore his courtroom voice like a second skin, even at family barbecues. He had a way of rephrasing everything you said so that it sounded slightly less intelligent than when you said it. What Claire means was his favorite opening line. Together, they were a unit. Jessica's charm, Richard's authority. At family dinners, they held court. Jessica told the stories, Richard corrected the details. My parents laughed, and I passed the salad. It was a system. And it worked. For everyone except me. 3 small things I noticed about Jessica over the years. She never returned borrowed money. Not the $300 for her car repair. Not the $1,200 emergency for their vacation deposit. Not the $500 she asked for just until Friday, which became just until never. She'd squeeze my hand and say, "You're the best sister anyone could ask for." And somehow, asking for the money back felt like betraying the compliment. She opened by mail. Not often, just enough that I'd find an envelope slightly resealed. A letter already read. "Oh, I thought that was for me," she'd say, waving her hand. Every time. And she always needed to know my news before anyone else, so she could share it first, repackaged as her own discovery. My promotion became, I always told Claire she should aim higher. My engagement became, I knew Lucas was perfect for her the moment I introduced them. She didn't introduce us. We met at a coffee shop. But those were small things, weren't they? In April, Lucas and I decided to have a proper wedding celebration. Nothing extravagant, a ceremony at the Botanical Conservatory on the edge of the city, where the ferns grew to the ceiling and the light came in filtered and green. 60 guests. Mid-September. Ferns were what brought me to conservation in the first place. I was 8 years old, standing in front of a fern garden with my father, asking him why they curled inward when they were young. He said they did it to protect themselves. He said the tightest spiral holds the most energy. I thought about that when I chose the venue. I designed the invitations myself. Cream cardstock, sage green ink, a small fern illustration in the corner. I hand-addressed every one because I wanted people to know they were chosen. Specifically, I sent 32 invitations by certified mail. 5 went to family, Mom and Dad, Jessica and Richard, and Aunt Carolyn, Mom's sister, who'd sent me a handwritten letter every birthday since I was 7. I sent them on April 14th. I know the exact date because I kept every postal receipt. By June, I'd received 21 RSVPs. By July, 26. From friends, coworkers, Lucas's family. From my family, nothing. Not one. I called Mom in early August. "Did you get the invitation?" "What invitation, honey?" I called Aunt Carolyn. Same answer. I called Dad's cell. He never picked up, but when I finally reached him, he said, "Jess mentioned you were thinking about something, but we didn't get any details." Jess mentioned I was thinking about something. 5 certified mail invitations. 5. And not a single one had arrived. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. The wood grain pressed into my palms. I remember that, the ridges against my skin, because my hands were flat and still, and I was holding myself together with nothing but the pressure of my own weight against that table. Lucas was across from me, laptop open, already pulling up USPS tracking data. "All 5, he said quietly. "Delivered. Sign for." "By who?" He turned the screen toward me. The signature on every delivery confirmation was the same. Loopy cursive. Little hearts dotting the I's. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards my entire life. Jessica. She'd intercepted every single one. And then Lucas found something else. My email, the one I'd sent to Mom with the digital invitation attached, had been deleted. Not by me. Someone had logged into my account from a device named Jess iPad. The IP matched their home network. He showed me the metadata log, his voice flat and careful, the way engineers speak when they know the data is ugly. "She used your saved password," he said, "from when you logged into your email on her tablet last Christmas." Last Christmas. When I'd checked a work email while helping Mom with the turkey. While Jessica poured wine and told a story about her new kitchen renovation. I could have called her right then. I had everything. The postal confirmations, the IP log, the device name. I could have screamed into the phone, forwarded it all to my parents, posted every screenshot in the family group chat. My best friend Renee said I should. Blow it up, she said over coffee. Let everyone see who she really is. I didn't. I didn't call Jessica. I didn't forward a single file. I didn't even mention it to my mother. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Fern Project, Phase 2. Boring enough that no one would ever click on it. And I kept building. That notebook became my second job. For 3 weeks, Lucas and I worked in silence. Not angry silence, the focused kind. The kind where two people sit at the same kitchen table, laptops open, coffee growing cold, and communicate in screenshots and timestamps. Lucas pulled USPS delivery confirmations for all 5 invitations, each one signed for at Jessica's address. Not my parents' house, not a shared mailbox. Her address. He printed them. I filed them. Then he traced the email deletion. My digital invitation to mom, erased remotely. The login came from a device named Jess iPad. The IP matched their home network. He showed me the metadata log, his voice flat and careful, the way engineers speak when they know the data is ugly. I organized the evidence into 5 sections, 5 slides on my phone, each one self-contained, each one worse than the last. Slide 1. USPS tracking confirmations for all 5 invitations. Delivery dates, delivery addresses, all Jessica's. Slide 2. A side-by-side comparison. Jessica's handwriting on the delivery signatures, loopy with the hearts, next to a birthday card she'd sent me 2 years ago. Identical. Slide 3. The email metadata. Device name, Jess iPad. IP address. Login timestamp, December 26th, 11:47 p.m. 1 hour after I'd gone home from Christmas dinner. Slide 4. A timeline. April 14th, invitations mailed. April 17th through April 22nd, all 5 signed for at her address. April 23rd, email deleted. August 2nd, Mom says, "What invitation, honey?" 7 months of silence, manufactured by one person. Slide 5. A screenshot of 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, the federal statute on mail theft and obstruction. Penalty, up to 5 years imprisonment. I didn't highlight anything. I didn't need to. The text spoke for itself. Lucas reviewed each slide twice. He didn't ask me what I was planning. He just said, "The metadata is clean. It'll hold." I saved the presentation to my phone, locked it with a 6-digit code. Then I waited. Jessica called me on November 8th, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. She wanted to coordinate what everyone's bringing. "I'm doing the cranberry sauce," she said, her voice bright and unbothered. "Can you do the green bean casserole? You always make such a good one." She sounded happy, relaxed, like a woman who had gotten away with something and had already forgotten she'd done it. "Sure," I said. "I'll bring the casserole." I didn't mention the invitations. I didn't mention the email. I didn't ask her why. I just wrote down green bean casserole on a sticky note and pressed it to the refrigerator. That was the hardest silence of my life. Not because I was angry. I was past angry by then. But because her voice was so normal. So completely, perfectly normal. As if erasing someone's wedding from existence was just another Tuesday. The house smelled like sage and butter. Mom was in the kitchen. Dad was in his armchair. Jessica was already at the dining table, arranging cloth napkins she'd brought from home, cream-colored, monogrammed. As if this were her house. Richard stood behind her, wine glass in hand, surveying the room the way he surveyed courtrooms. He nodded at me. "Claire?" "Richard?" Lucas squeezed my hand once, then let go. We sat down. Turkey was carved, plates were filled, wine was poured. Mom asked the same question she'd been asking for 36 years. "So, any news?" Already looking at Jessica when she said it. Jessica smiled, smoothed her napkin across her lap, and began. I set down my fork, picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip. Actually, I said, I do have news. I'm not single anymore. I've been married for 4 months. The room went quiet. Jessica's Pinot Noir stopped mid-swirl. Dad's eyes lifted from his plate for the first time all evening. Mom's hand went to her chest. Married, Mom whispered. To who? To Lucas. I nodded toward him. We had a ceremony in September. His mother was there. His whole family was there. Why didn't you tell us? Mom's voice cracked. I did. I took another sip of wine, set the glass down, and slid my phone across the table. These are USPS tracking confirmations. 5 certified mail invitations I sent on April 14th. Each one shows delivered. Each one shows signed for. Mom picked up the phone, squinted. Dad leaned in. Delivered where? Mom asked. Look at the addresses. She looked. Her face changed. Jessica didn't move. I let the screen sit there. For a long time. Richard's face had gone from calculating to rigid. I watched his eyes move to his wife, then back to the phone, then to the table. He was doing the math now. A litigation attorney sitting 5 feet from federal evidence, his bar license somewhere in the calculation. He adjusted his cufflinks once, then stopped, then didn't touch them again. He was the first to speak. Claire, you can't seriously be considering. I'm not considering anything, Richard. I'm showing you what I could consider. Jessica was crying now. Quietly. Not the performative tears I'd seen at family dinners when she wanted sympathy. Real tears. The kind that falls straight down. Claire, please. I picked up my phone, opened the browser, typed in the USPS complaint portal. The page loaded. White background, blue header, a form waiting to be filled out. Everyone watched. I looked at the form for a long time. The cursor blinked. Then I closed the tab. 4 minutes and 23 seconds. I'd counted. I set the phone face down on the table. I'm not filing anything, I said. Jessica stared at me. Everyone stared at me. The room held its breath for a moment. Dad with his hands flat on the table. Mom with both hands over her mouth. Richard, very still, looking at nothing. And then Jessica said the only honest thing she'd said in 7 months. Because she was happy, her voice broke. She was genuinely happy, and I'm not. I looked at her then. Really looked. The diamond ring on her finger suddenly looked heavy, like a shackle rather than a trophy. Her mascara had tracked 2 thin lines down her cheeks, and she wasn't doing anything about it, wasn't performing grief. She was just sitting inside it. For a moment, she didn't look like the sister who filled every room. She looked like someone who had been performing the whole time and had finally forgotten the words. Look at my life, Claire, she said, her voice dropping. Richard, he criticizes everything. My weight, my clothes, my laugh. Mom and Dad, they don't love me. They love the idea of me, the trophy daughter, the success story. And when I saw your invitation, so simple, so real, you and Lucas not trying to prove anything to anyone, I felt empty, like a fraud. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I didn't think about what I was taking from you. I only thought about what your happiness made me feel about mine. The room held its breath. That confession cracked something open. Not just in Jessica, in the room. Dad pushed his chair back. Not to leave, just to separate himself from the table, from the system he'd been part of without knowing it. Mom covered her mouth with both hands. I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't say anything about the folding chair. I didn't say anything about the word capable that had followed me since I was 12 years old. I just let it sit. All of it. In the middle of the table, next to the untouched food and the monogrammed napkins and the wine no one was drinking. Then I stood up. You can have all of it, I said, quietly, looking at Jessica. The spotlight, the attention, the pressure that comes with it, it's yours. I don't want any of it anymore. I picked up my wine glass, took one last sip, set it down on Jessica's monogram napkin, a small, deliberate placement that said more than any sentence could. Lucas stood with me. We left our plates on the table. We didn't say goodbye. We drove home in silence. Not the tense kind, the finished kind. The kind that settles over two people who have been holding their breath together and can finally let it go. Lucas kept his eyes on the road. I kept mine on the peppermint stick in my hand. Red and white stripes, slightly sticky from the warmth of Dad's pocket. The same kind he'd given me when I was 8, sitting on his knee in his study while Mom and Jessica planned Jessica's birthday party in the next room. I hadn't been invited to help plan, but Dad had a peppermint stick, and that was enough. 30 years later, it was still enough. When we pulled into the driveway of our house, the porch light was on. Lucas had left it on. He always left it on when we went somewhere that might be hard to come back from. Inside, on the kitchen counter, 2 mugs were already waiting. Hot chocolate, the real kind, not the packet kind, and 2 peppermint sticks from the small shop in Wisconsin we'd found on our honeymoon. A place we'd stumbled into out of the cold, the way you stumble into things that end up mattering. You remembered, I said. That's what people do, he said simply, when they're paying attention. I stood in our kitchen holding a mug that had been made for me before I'd gotten home, and I thought about the word my mother had used for 30 years to explain why I didn't need what everyone else got. Capable. I set the mug down. I didn't feel capable. I felt something else. Something I didn't have a word for yet. Something quieter and more permanent. Like a fern that had finally stopped curling inward. Like the tightest spiral releasing. Not because someone forced it open, but because it had held long enough, and the time for opening had come. The highway was dark outside our window. The headlights of other cars cut narrow paths through November. And somewhere behind me, in a house that smelled like sage and butter and the quiet wreckage of a family myth, my sister was sitting at a table full of food that no one was eating. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. Like setting down something heavy you've been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. In the weeks that followed, things shifted. Not dramatically, not with shouting or declarations, just quietly. Mom called. Twice. The first time she cried. The second time she said, I should have seen it. I should have seen a lot of things. I didn't say, yes, you should have. I just listened. Dad sent me a card. No words inside. Just his handwriting on the envelope, and a photograph of the 2 of us from when I was 9, standing in front of a fern garden at the Botanical Center. I put it on the refrigerator, next to the sticky note that still said green bean casserole. Richard sent me a LinkedIn connection request. I declined. Jessica and I didn't speak. Not because I told her not to. I never said that. She just stopped calling. Richard stopped attending family dinners. I heard, through Mom, that he'd suggested they take some time to regroup. A litigation attorney's way of saying, I need to assess the damage. As for me, I went back to work. The wetland restoration project was entering its 2nd year. There were permits to file, soil samples to analyze, and a team of 12 people who needed someone steady at the front. Lucas's father called me the week after Thanksgiving. He'd read my last conservation report, the full 60-page document, footnotes and all, and had questions about the filtration systems. He'd been explaining watershed management to his friends at the golf club, he said. He thought I was brilliant. Daughter-in-law was the word he used, and it sounded like something I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. I still have that peppermint stick. It sits in a small glass jar on my desk, next to a framed photo of Lucas and me at the conservatory on our wedding day. Ferns climbing the glass walls behind us, light coming in filtered and green, the 2 of us laughing at something just outside the frame. We ate tacos from a food truck that evening. We danced to our music until midnight. No expensive flowers that die in a day, no country club with a 5-year waiting list. Just a conservatory full of plants that had been growing long before we arrived and would keep growing long after. Sometimes I pick up that peppermint stick and hold it. Not because it tastes like anything anymore. It's stale and cracked and probably 15 years past its expiration date. But it reminds me of something. Family isn't the people who sit at the head of the table. It isn't the people who get their tuition paid, or their mistakes forgiven, or their place settings arranged first. Family is the people who remember the peppermint sticks, the small, quiet things, the moments no one else saw, the hand in the pocket, the porch light left on, the mug made before you got home, the warmth that transfers without a word. That's what I kept. That's what I chose. And if you ask me whether I'd do it all again, the 7 months of silence, the 3 weeks of building, the 5 slides, the tab I closed, I'd say yes, every time. Not because destroying her would have been wrong, but because it would have been loud. And I don't do loud. If you're working out another reason, so let me ask you something. I had the evidence. I had the federal statute. I had 5 witnesses and a confession. I could have filed that report. I could have let the system do what the system does. But I didn't. Was I right to show mercy? Or should I have filed? Some of you will say I was too kind, that Jessica needed real consequences, that closing the tab let her off too easily, that mercy without accountability is just permission to do it again. Some of you will say I did exactly the right thing, that destroying her would have destroyed the family too, that mercy was the final act of quiet power, that walking away whole is the only victory that matters. I think about it sometimes. Late at night, when the house is quiet and the peppermint jar catches the light, I still don't know the answer. Tell me yours. I'll talk about him, Remember that kitchen table? The one where Claire sat with her hands flat against the wood grain, holding herself together with nothing but pressure and silence? She's at a different table now, a small Italian place. Pasta, bread, a glass of wine she actually wants to drink, and a man across from her who said, "You stayed exactly who you are." Every I didn't, every moment she chose silence over spectacle, evidence over emotion, mercy over destruction, was a brick. And brick by brick, she built a life that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. Maybe you know someone like Claire, someone who's been handing out blank checks to people who never earned them. Someone sitting at a folding chair by the kitchen door, smiling, helping with the dishes, driving home in silence, wondering why capable always has to mean you don't need anything. Maybe that someone is you. Obviously, prawie wyzybaksmith and provos into. If this story stayed with you, if you're still thinking about whether Claire should have filed that report, or whether mercy was enough, tell me. The comments are open. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, stories about women who chose quiet over chaos and won, subscribe. I tell one every week. You know what I've learned from telling these stories? The loudest people in the room are almost never the strongest. And the ones who scare you the most? They're the ones who don't need you to know what they're capable of. They just set down their wine glass, close the tab, and walk away. Until next time.